Hello, everyone. Welcome to my live broadcast on my YouTube station, Smita Sharma, journalist, and a request, before we begin the discussion to everybody that if you like the content here, do subscribe, share, and importantly, press on the bell icon notification so that you get to know when I upload new content here. Now, we are going to talk about the West Asian flare-up, the situation that continues to be extremely tense and fragile at this point in time. We are also nearing the first anniversary of the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel that claimed at least 1,200 lives and 250 people were taken as hostages. Several of them still remain as hostages. And in fact, a lot of the Israelis have been blaming Prime Minister Netanyahu for the situation, saying that he's the one who had refused to go into any negotiation. There's been a lot of anger against him, but for the moment, domestically, maybe it's changed for him, even at a huge cost of civilian lives, because the way Israeli airstrikes happened in Lebanon, we saw those attacks on walkie-talkies, on pagers, and then the airstrike just a short while after Netanyahu's address to the United Nations General Assembly that claimed at least 700 lives. These strikes happened in residential areas, the areas in Beirut too, which is densely populated, and that claimed the life of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah chief, one of the most prominent faces of the Hezbollah since it came into a foundation in 1982 following that invasion of Israel into Lebanon. So it became the Shia militarily resistance force. What happens next? We have seen the Iran's supreme leader Khamenei's reactions on X, the platform Twitter, where he says that, of course, they're all standing together. The resistance stands firmly with Hezbollah. But really, has Hezbollah been weakened? Where is this war eventually going to end? To talk about all of these issues and more, I'm joined here by a very, very prominent voice, Dr. Johny, the international affairs editor of The Hindu, somebody who's a prolific writer and author, and also whose book is going to come out soon, in fact, on that first anniversary of the Hamas war. He's also got a very detailed profile of Hassan Nasrallah in today's edition of the Hindu newspaper. So make sure that you pick it up and you read it. Thank you so much, Stanley, for joining us here in this discussion.
Thank you, Smita. Thanks for having me here.
I know it's been an absolutely busy day for you, the last 24 hours, trying to fill in all that content. But really, to begin with, if you could give a sense to our viewers, and I would request our viewers that if you have questions, feel free to drop into the chat box. I'll be happy to ask them to Dr. Johny over the next half an hour. Give a sense, because Hassan Nasrallah has been considered as the father figure of this entire Shia resistance movement. How big a loss is it really for Hezbollah to recuperate from? Because he's not the first leader, of course, who's been killed. Literally a whole bunch of leadership of Hezbollah has been destroyed over the past few days.
Yeah, it's a huge setback. It's a huge setback, not just for Hezbollah, but for Iran and its so-called axis of resistance as well. Because Nasrallah has been leading Hezbollah since 1992. And during this period, over the past 3 decades, if you look at Hezbollah's evolution from a ragtag guerrilla force that was fighting the Israeli occupying forces in southern Lebanon into arguably the most powerful non-state actor in West Asia. And Nasrallah transformed Hezbollah into a stronger military than even the Lebanese national military. And it's not just a militia group. It also has a sprawling social network, a political wing, which has representatives in the Lebanese parliament. And Nasrallah has also been, a power broker inside Lebanon. So we are talking about a multifaceted leader who had very strong ties with the Iranians as well as Iran's axis of resistance. And during this period, you could also see Nasrallah's tactics effectively forcing the Israelis out of Lebanon in 2000, 18 years after its occupation started. And in 2006, the last time when Israel and Hezbollah fought a full-scale war, after 30 days of war, Israel had to accept a ceasefire and leave Lebanon. So Nasrallah had always, had this charismatic, claims and the leadership among the Shia resistance forces. So losing that kind of a leader of that stature, who had led and transformed Hezbollah over the last 30 years, and who was also wanted for the several attacks Hezbollah had carried out, because Hezbollah has been designated as a terrorist organization by the United States, Israel, and some of their allies. So loss of that kind of a leader is a massive blow to Hezbollah. There is no doubt about it. But as you pointed out, this is not the first time Hezbollah is losing a leader. right? And Nasrallah became the chief of Hezbollah after Abbas Musawi was assassinated by Israel in 1992. And Nasrallah was just 32 years old at that time. So these kind of organizations basically are built into, especially when it comes to Hezbollah, you look at the organizational structure of Hezbollah, it is built into a Leninist organization. Nasrallah is the Secretary General. They have a Politburo. They have a central committee. So what Israel is trying to do as of now is to degrade Hezbollah step by step. Because if you look at the pager attack or walkie-talkie attacks, Israel targeted the ground functionaries of Hezbollah. We don't know how many Hezbollah operatives were taken out or incapacitated, but still, at least the aim of Hezbollah's attack was to Israel's attack was to first target the low-level functionaries, and then Israel started the airstrikes, and the airstrikes took out several of Hezbollah's commanders. Its drone chief, its missile chief, its jihad council chief. So then you started with the low-level functionaries, then you go for the mid-level commanders, and then you hit the top. You take out Hassan Nasrallah himself. So there is a clear pattern in the way Israel is operating here.
So, the fact that Israel, of course, must have been planning all of this. I mean, killing Ismail Haniya of the Hamas inside the presidential palace during the swearing in of the new Iranian president just some time ago, or whether it's the walkie-talkie attack, the pager attack, these are not things that have happened overnight. Clearly, the Israeli Defense Forces have been at it for a stretch of time right now. But does Hezbollah look way more vulnerable right now than it has ever been in the recent past, given that all this has been coordinated so strategically? There's a communication sort of a breakdown. You have your leaders who've been broken down as well.
Yeah. So we can look at it in two ways. One question is the one you asked, whether Hezbollah has been, setback. Yes, I would say yes, because Hezbollah took a beating at the low level. It lost its mid-level commanders, and it lost its Secretary General who had led Hezbollah for over 3 decades. So this kind of a setback Hezbollah had not faced in 2000, not in 2006. So in 2000, Hezbollah, after it forced Israel to withdraw from Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah then said that this was the first Arab victory against the Israelis. And in 2006, again, when Israel had to wrap up its invasion after a month, leaving Hezbollah where it was, again Hezbollah claimed victory. And ever since, Israel has been trying to kill Hassan Nasrallah, but they were not successful. So compared to that, the kind of losses Hezbollah had suffered over...
We had a little signal freeze, Stanley. If you could please repeat yourself.
Hello, am I audible now? Yeah.
Yes.
So, no, my point of view is that if you compare with the past conflicts, past wars Hezbollah had fought, Hezbollah had not suffered this kind of setback in the past. Not in 2000, not in 2006. Both in 2000 and 2006, Hezbollah had claimed victory. And ever since 2006, Israel has been trying to kill Hassan Nasrallah. And he's been kind of in underground, occasionally coming up and giving speeches on Hezbollah's Al-Manar TV, etc., etc. But this time, especially over the past couple of weeks, the kind of setbacks Hezbollah had suffered, this had not happened in the past. So we can clearly say that Israel has dealt a heavy blow to Hezbollah. There is no doubt about it. But the second question here is that whether Hezbollah has been defeated. Because Israel says what is Israel's military objective? At least when it comes to Lebanon, Israel says its military objective is to enable the 60,000 people who were displaced from northern Lebanon, northern Israel, especially the Upper Galilee region. Israel wants to make sure that they return their homes. And to make that possible, what Israel has to do is to stop Hezbollah from firing rockets. And Israeli airstrikes had dealt a blow to Hezbollah, that's correct. But the question is whether Israel can stop Hezbollah from firing rockets only through airstrikes by taking out its commanders. I would say no, because just today, this morning, sirens were going up in and around Jerusalem, in the West Bank settlement areas. So those were far away from the border, which means Hezbollah has now started firing medium-range rockets. Right? So what Israel will do next? So if Israel wants to meet its objective, it has to begin a ground offensive. So I think that's where the conflict is now headed to. And once you launch the ground offensive, the war will acquire a completely different character. So what Israel hopes is that by leaving back-to-back blows to Hezbollah. Israel thinks it has basically decapitated the group, but Hezbollah retains its capability of firing rockets into Israel. So Israel would like to create a buffer, on the border, push Hezbollah maybe to the north of the Litani River in Lebanon. This is what Israel had tried to do in 1978, in 1980, and again in 2006, and it failed. In 1978, Israel went to Lebanon to push the PLO to the north of the Litani River, but Israel had to pull back. In 1982, Israel went to Lebanon to push the PLO out of the country, and it managed to do that. The PLO was forced to leave, to relocate from Lebanon to Tunisia, but Hezbollah was born because it was the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982 that gave the perfect, geopolitical setting for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards to help create Hezbollah. And Hezbollah turned out to be a greater threat to Israel than the PLO, as we all know. In 2006, of course, Israel wanted to destroy destroy Hezbollah, but no, it had to accept a ceasefire and leave. So this is an approach Israel has had. I mean, through the ground offensive, Israel wanted to meet this objective, keep the militants away from the border. Israel has been trying to do this from 1978. Whether Israel would meet that objective this time, I'm doubtful. We have to wait and see.
Okay. Stanley, are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
My apologies to the viewers. We are having some signal breaks out here. But, Stanley, again, going back to the fact that if Hezbollah is weakened right now, Hamas has also suffered significant blows. But as we always say that, you can destroy the leadership, you can destroy the men, perhaps not the ideology. It does look like Israel does want a ground offensive, and Israel does want Iran drawn into this conflict directly. Why is this such an important desperation for Israel right now? Because that does seem to be the indication that it really wants Iran to come into a conflict directly.
Yeah. So we have to understand, it's very important to understand why the Lebanese war, why the Israeli attacks on Lebanon going on. It's because Israel has not met its objectives in Gaza. So Israel started its retaliatory war on Gaza a year ago after the Hamas attack of October 7, 2023. And what were Israel's declared objectives? One was to finish off Hamas, destroy or crush Hamas, as Netanyahu had put it. Second was to release the hostages. And, Gaza is a besieged enclave. Gaza had been under the Israeli blockade since 2007. And ever since the Hamas attack, Israel had, completely sealed off Gaza, all the Gaza's exit and entry points. And Rafah was the only, checkpoint which the Israelis were not controlling, but Israel is now controlling the Philadelphia corridor as well, which means the entire Gaza Strip has been sealed off by Israel. So Israel has been pounding a besieged enclave of 2.3 million people over the last 11 months, and Israel still has not managed to defeat or crush Hamas. It's a matter of the fact. And Hezbollah started firing rockets into Israel in, quote unquote, in solidarity with the Palestinians. So Nasrallah's logic was that as long as Israel continues the war on Gaza, I am going to fire rockets into Israel. This is how Nasrallah looked at the conflict. And, Netanyahu doesn't want to have a ceasefire in Gaza. Two reasons. One, he has to sell a victory to his people, right? Like that I crushed Hamas. He hasn't crushed Hamas. And Hamas is actually regrouping in areas which Israel at one point of time said, especially in northern Gaza. Israel said the war was over, we cleaned it off, but then Hamas is regrouping. And hostages, some 150 plus hostages are still hostages. Most of them are dead. Israel has not managed to, manage to release them. So he can't accept a ceasefire. And if he accepts a ceasefire with Hamas at this point of time, his government will collapse. It's as simple as that. But at the same time, because the Gaza war is going on, Hezbollah is firing rockets into northern Israel, which has displaced some 60 to 70,000 people from northern Israel in the Upper Galilee region who want to go back to their homes. So Netanyahu wanted a ceasefire on the northern border, but he did not want a ceasefire in the southern border. But Hezbollah would not ready to stop firing rockets. So he was left with not many options but to escalate the conflict with Hezbollah. But what Netanyahu did is that, or the Israelis, they sensed a reluctance on the Hezbollah or the Iranian side to escalate the conflict, because Nasrallah wanted to fight a limited war. You look at Hezbollah's military, Hezbollah's rocket stockpile. Hezbollah has short-range, long-range rockets, but they hadn't used them. What Nasrallah wanted to do to terrorize only the Upper Galilee region, keep the people away, keep the pressure mounting on the Israelis without giving them a ceasefire, without giving them a victory. But he did not want an open war. He did not want a full-scale war with the Israelis. So that reluctance, I think the Israelis sensed. So the moment Israel decided to escalate the conflict, you can see Israel went for a knockout punch. Israel realized that Hezbollah is not ready to fight an all-out war. So that is an opportunity. So we are going in with full force. So Israel first explodes pages, then walkie-talkies, then launches a massive airstrike, which can be comparable to the 1967 Israeli air strikes on the Egyptian Air Force. So that kind of massive airstrike, and then Israel goes for Hezbollah leaders. I don't think neither Hezbollah nor the Iranians expected this kind of a response from the Israelis.
But in doing so, Israel has also set absolutely dangerous precedents for war. I mean, every possible law, international rule that we talk about in warfare has been just tossed out of the window. So this certain impunity on the one hand, and on the other hand, this entire sort of claims by the US that they were drawing up a ceasefire plan where Israel had been actually taken into the loop, and then Israel rejects it. Who are they really trying to convince here? Or, it's just a game on that, go ahead, do whatever you want with the impunity that you need till such time that the president elections window, doesn't sort of draw down on the US.
Yeah, they're not trying to convince anybody. They're trying to fool everybody, because the statements coming from Washington do not make any sense to me, because whatever Israel has done over the past 11 months, they did it with the United States support. Biden administration has been supplying weapons to Israel. Biden administration has offered political and diplomatic support for Israel. Without that support, Israel cannot behave with the kind of impunity Israel is behaving today, right? Because the pager explosions, you never know who the pagers actually targeted. A good number of civilians were also attacked. And the kind of airstrikes Israel has been carrying out is in complete violation of the laws of the war, right? In Gaza, they killed 40,000 people, and more than 40,000 people in 11 months. And of the 40,000 people, a vast majority of them are women and children. Nobody in the free world seems to be bothered about it, is it? Do you see any criticism, any major harsh criticism coming from the West? No. Is the United States going to stop supplying ammunition or weapons to Israel? No. Right? Is Europe, European Union Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell might make some statement, but is Europe planning to impose any sanctions on Israel? Not to my knowledge. So basically, Israel is allowed to do this because of the hegemony of the Western political order, what they call the rules-based order, the so-called rules-based order. So that's why Israel is able to do this. Israel is able to behave like a rogue state with impunity, right? But the larger strategic question is that what is the end game? What is the end game even for the Israelis? That is the question, right? Because your war in Gaza remains unfinished. And even if you finish the war, you never know whether Hamas will regroup or what is going to happen to Gaza, because Gaza, you talk to rights organizations, you talk to the Palestinian Authority, you talk to the journalists, Gaza has been completely finished. Most of the buildings in Gaza has been brought down by the Israeli bombardment, and 2.3 million people of Gaza, almost the entire population has been displaced. Right? And what the Israelis are going to do with Gaza once the war is over, whenever the war is over, right? Because this is collective punishment of 2.3 million people. It's not 10,000 people. It's not 5,000 people. So Gaza remains an unfinished business for the Israelis. Hamas is not destroyed. That is one thing. And now you have opened another front. And even in Lebanon, okay, you have weakened Hezbollah, no doubt about it. Now, the killing of Nasrallah is, Joe Biden says it's a moment of justice, right? Because Nasrallah is a terrorist who was wanted by the Americans and the Israelis. But then, what are you going to do next? If you want to make sure that your civilians are going back to the villages, which means you need to launch a ground offensive. And if you launch a ground offensive, Where you are headed to? You are headed towards an all-out war in West Asia. You're going to fight a two-front war in West Asia. So, yeah, there is no way out as of now unless you continue to fight the
What's
war.
the indication that you're reading now from Tehran, Stanley? In the past 24 hours, you've seen the reactions, you've seen news reports come in of Khamenei being put in a safe house. What's the mood you're reading? Because we were expecting a retaliation post Ismail Hania's killing. That didn't happen. Perhaps they were trying to sort of dangle the carrot of the the nuclear program instead. But right now, looking at the statements and the mood within, it's not a unified response, though, to Nasrallah's killing. I'm told, of course, there are some sections even within Lebanon or within the Arab world who must be relieved about it or happy about it. But within Iran, what do you read as the next move?
See, when the Iranian embassy was bombed on April 1st by the Israelis in Damascus, Iran responded. On April 14th, they launched an unprecedented missile and drone attacks towards Israel. Right. But when Ismail Haniya was killed, Iran said that it would retaliate, but it did not retaliate. I don't know whether they would attack in the future because IRGC said that they would basically retaliate. But I can understand that why did they hold back fire was because Israel clearly wanted Iran to retaliate. Israel wanted a larger war with the Iranians. So, if you look at the progression of the conflict, it started in Gaza, of course, with Hamas's attack, and then it's Israel's retaliatory war in Gaza. Then it spreads to Lebanon, where the Israelis are targeting Hezbollah. And the next step will be Iran, because Israel would prefer to attack Iranian nuclear facilities, but the Israelis would not do it alone. They wanted the United States on their side. So basically, if you want the Americans to drag into the conflict, what you wanted is a wider regional war. So the Iranians, after Ismail Haniya was killed, Iranians realized this, so they did not want to go what Israel wanted, at least at that point of time. This is what I said earlier, the Iranian reluctance. You can call it strategic patience, you can call it reluctance or whatever. So the Iranians wanted a limited war. Hezbollah wanted to fight a limited war. They did not want an all-out war, but the Israelis sensed this reluctance, and what they wanted was a wider war. And they went for it. That's why they went for a knockout punch. So the Iranians did not expect this kind of back-to-back attacks, fast, with massive firepower, precision, intelligence-guided attacks. They did not expect this to happen from the Israelis. Now Iran is on the back foot, right? And so the question is whether there would be a change in the strategic calculus in Tehran, because their limited war, their strategic patience were not rewarding. Israel exploited that, grabbed the momentum, and went for all-out punches on Iran's allies. They killed IRGC commanders. They killed Ismail Haniya in Tehran, humiliating the Iranian leadership. And then they took out Hassan Nasrallah, who was the most powerful and influential Iranian ally in the region, who was a central figure in Iran's axis of resistance. So this is a clear message from the Iranians. So the question is whether there would be a change in the strategic calculus in Tehran, that we should also up the ante. We should retaliate quickly, faster, to restore deterrence. Else the Israelis will not stop here, because the next stop could be an attack on Iranian facilities. I'll tell you, I call this a conflict loop. I wrote this in today's Hindu, because nobody is deterring anybody. That is what is making the current crisis in West Asia a lot more dangerous. Because Iran built all these resistance groups, like, let's say, Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic resistance, the Shia mobilization units of Syria and Iraq. Iran built these groups as a forward defense doctrine, as a means of deterrence. But it did not deter the Israelis. And Israel is using massive firepower against all these groups. Israel killed IRGC commanders. Israel attacked and killed Hamas leaders. Israel is now taking out Hezbollah leaders. But that's not deterring these militant groups. They continue to fire rockets into the Israelis, right? So, and the militant groups themselves, Hezbollah, keeps firing rockets into Israel. That doesn't stop Israel from carrying out retaliatory attacks. So this is kind of a conflict loop. Nobody is deterring anybody. So, which means these kind of attacks are likely to go on. And Iran is definitely facing, I think, some critical questions about the way they approached the conflict because their strategic patience or reluctance are actually backfiring with Israel going for knockout punches and all out wars.
Hmm. There is a viewer, Aditya Mohan, who wants to know your thoughts on the alleged involvement of Rinson Jose in the Lebanon pager blast. Stanley, any thoughts on that?
Involvement of whom?
Rinson Jose, the Norwegian, apparently business, Kerala-born Norwegian businessman.
Yeah, yes. I saw the story. So, you have all kind of reports. What we know, if you look at the facts, what we know is that Israel had made years of planning to carry out this kind of an attack because Mossad set up a front company, a front organization, and this front organization, entered into a business contract with the Taiwanese company, Apollo Gold, and they set up manufacturing units elsewhere. And these manufacturing units started making pagers and other communication devices. And this French company started selling these communication devices to multiple clients. So this was an years-long operation. We don't know who all were involved. We don't know whether the Taiwanese were involved, whether the Americans were involved. No.
Hmm.
But what we know is that, yes, this Budapest Hungarian company was an Israeli front organization, and they were actually operating. It is a consultancy. You go and read their LinkedIn profile. They call themselves a consultancy working in protecting environment, etc., etc. But they
Hmm.
were actually making pages and selling the pages. And the company's CEO was a particle physicist
Hmm.
who was trained in London. And then this company was selling pages and communication devices to multiple clients, including Hezbollah.
Hmm. Well,
So what we don't know is whether Hezbollah directly or the Lebanese government directly sourced it from them, or whether
hmm.
they came through the Iranians. And if they came through the Iranians, which also meant that Iran or Iranian IRGC or other Iranian networks were also infiltrated by the Israeli intelligence.
Hmm. Yeah, and Rinsen Jose, of course, has denied all these allegations in his conversation with Reuters. We believe that the Bulgarian Security National Agency is probing them, but they have said that the firm is not involved. So, a lot of it will be speculations right now, and we do not know unless there are some concrete evidences that do come out. But dangerous precedents definitely have been set. When you are just crossing borders with an impunity, when you are targeting wireless technology, because this can then be used by state actors and non-state actors across the world. So we are
Exactly.
we are in a very dangerous space right now, I think. And while the Israeli Prime Minister may be patting his back on his successes, but it's an extremely challenging zone for any responsible state actor to really navigate through. Coming to some of the last questions, Stanley, when it comes to India's position, I mean, we are constantly saying that we have maintained a principled position. We of course condemn the October 7 attacks as terror strikes. We do recognize Israel's right to self-defense, but at the same time, we are concerned about casualties, humanitarian casualties. Are these mere words? Does the global South, anybody in global South, whether it's India, China, does anybody have any leverage with Tel Aviv at this point in time? And whatever is being said, whether it's the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres or it's India, these are just words without any weightage right now.
So India is trying to send, mixed messages to both sides. India doesn't want to upset its relationship with the Israelis, irrespective of what Israel is doing clearly. But at the same time, India also doesn't want to completely give up the traditional position it had taken vis-a-vis the Palestinians. So you look at the voting records. So India, even on the voting records, India had some mixed signals. In the most recent vote in the UNGA, India abstained, which asked Israel to withdraw from all the occupying territories within 2 years. But prior to that, India voted in favor of 4 resolutions in the UNGA that condemned the Israeli settlements in the West Bank, that asked Israel to cease fire in Gaza, and that also condemned Israel's continuing occupation of Syria's Golan Heights, and also that recognized the Palestinian right to self determination. So India has historically, diverse relationship in the region. especially with on the one side Iran, on the other side Arab world, and the third pillar is the Israelis. So India is trying to maintain this balance. That's what the Indians are trying to do as of now. You can see different when the Prime Minister meets Abbas, he says he's worried about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. When the Prime Minister or when it comes to an abstention at the voting, Indian diplomat would say that we don't support any ban of weapon sales to Israel. At the same time, we also say that we stand with Israelis over the terror attacks, etc., etc. This balancing you see. The second part of your question is anybody in the global south have any leverage on Israel? I would say no. I'd say the only country that has any meaningful leverage over Israel is the United States. And the Biden administration refuses to use that leverage. Whether it is Secretary Blinken or President Biden or National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan or the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, they all say fancy words, they all call for ceasefire, etc., etc., but they do nothing. They continue to support Israel's war efforts in the region. And without American support, Israel would not be able to do what it is doing today, which is as simple as that. It's as simple as that. And other countries, but in the global south, other countries have raised greater voices of concern than India, because India continues, as I said, continues to balance between these two sides, whereas Brazil and South Africa are much more vocal, especially South Africa, which has taken Israel to the UN World Court over what South Africa calls a genocidal war in Gaza. And you can see that there were two rulings from the ICJ about the way Israel is conducting the war in Gaza. Both were critical of the state of Israel. And again, Brazil is also extremely critical of the way Israel is conducting the war. And then China, especially the Chinese foreign minister, again was very vocal about Israel's what they call reckless, continuing attacks over Lebanon or in Gaza. But India doesn't use that kind of harsh words. I can see that only External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said a few months earlier that at the end of the day, if I quote him, he said, at the end of the day, the fact of the matter remains that the Palestinians have been denied of their statehood. So this was the some of the very few occasions where we did some clear talk about the issue. But otherwise, we try to balance between all sides.
Right. Even in terms of the rapprochement that have recently happened, whether it's Iran and Saudi or whether it's Abraham Accords, it's either been US or China playing some roles, not really India in that. Just the last two questions, Stanley, and this is a larger question. Is the morality compass of the world sort of dead when it comes to the global leadership? I mean, there's so much of talk around realpolitik today, and realpolitik is what Dr. S. Jaishankar keeps talking about. Everybody says that you have to work according to your own interests. So is morality really a thing of the past now when it comes to leadership on the global stage?
Yeah. So I'm not a great fan of morality in foreign policy making, not because I support immoral decisions, no, because in foreign policy decisions, real politics always triumphed over moral concerns of different countries. Because you see, sometimes countries talk about morality, foreign policy, etc., but only when it suits their interess. Because we can talk about the United States, which is always worried about human rights and right to protect people, etc., etc. But the United States has been absolutely fine with Israel's continuing occupation of the Palestinian territories, not from October 7, but over the last 70 plus years. So the US does nothing that will basically harm the Israelis, because Israel is an American ally. Or you look at Saudi Arabia, the United States is very much concerned about human rights violations in Iran, where they attack the theocratic regime, but the United States hardly raise a voice about the Saudi regime because Saudi Arabia is your ally. So morality has always been used by great powers for their interest, but at the same time, morality is an important idea, because when it comes to when it comes to countries claiming a moral leadership, at least, or when it comes to massacres and genocides in the past, that had triggered passions, that had triggered international actions in the past. But so it remains an important idea, though great powers do not follow that in its letter and spirit. But what we are witnessing today is that when a particular country carries out this kind of attack, And if that country enjoys the support of the great powers, the existing major powers, they do not face any kind of repercussions. That's what we are witnessing today. Because great powers always violate international laws. You can't actually take the United States to task over the Iraq invasion. You can't even pass a resolution in the UN Security Council against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the same thing, you don't even impose sanctions on Israel or what the Israelis are doing. You have sanctions on Iran because Iran is your enemy. You have sanctions on North Korea, which is a rogue state, rogue state that stays outside the rules-based order. But when it comes to Israel, Israel is your ally. So you don't talk about punitive measures about Israel, irrespective of what Israel is doing. So, if morality is something, if morality is a great bedrock of the international system, if your moral concerns do not bother you, even after 40,000 people and roughly 70% of them are women and children were killed in just 11 months, I would say that morality is not important for any major powers of the current global order.
Finally, then, Stanley, keeping in mind the kind of destruction, rubble, I mean, there's nothing left to be bombed. Israel has bombed homes, hospitals, residential areas, refugee camps, media houses,
Ambulances.
Ambulances.
Yeah.
It says that, you rush for safe spaces, but what is a safe space now? And where do people actually return to after the bombing has happened? These are questions nobody will be able to answer anymore. So does the two-state solution still stand, which is still being spoken about by powers, including India? But given that so much has changed on the ground, whether it's topography, whether it's geography, whether it's occupation.
Two-state solution died long time ago. So given the current reality on the ground, I don't think two-state solution is going to work anytime soon. There was a point of time when two-state solution looked feasible in the 1990s, when there was a peace bloc even in Israel, especially the Labour Party, and the Palestinians, who were until then called terrorists by the Israelis, were willing to engage with the Israelis. And the Palestinians were ready to accept a future Palestinian state based on the 1967 border, which is only 22% of historical Palestine. They were willing to accept that. And the Israelis were willing to recognize the Palestinian right to self-determination. So both sides came close to establishing a two-state solution in the early 1990s. Ever since two-state solution, the idea of two-state solution has collapsed. You talk about today's greater Israel, which is the historical Palestine under the Ottoman Empire. So you have Israel proper, and then you have the West Bank, you have the Gaza Strip, you have East Jerusalem, right? Which are predominantly Palestinian territories. So you have 700,000 Israeli settlers living in the West Bank and East Jerusalem today. So if you are talking about a two-state solution based on the 1967 border, the Israeli leadership will have to pull back this 700,000 Palestinian, and which Israeli prime minister is going to do that? Nobody is going to do that. And especially after this war, you have completely destroyed Gaza. So what should be the future of Gaza, right? And what should be the status of the capital of a future Palestinian state? The Palestinians say that East Jerusalem is their capital. It should be their capital. And the Israelis say Jerusalem is their eternal undivided capital. And not just that, in the 1990s, you would still see Israeli leaders who say they are committed to two-state solution. Now you tell me, which Israeli leader publicly say that they are committed to two-state solution? Benjamin Netanyahu says there won't be a two-state Palestinian state on my watch. Israeli Knesset passed a resolution recently saying that no Palestinian state will be created. Netanyahu says when a couple of European countries recognized the Palestinian state, Netanyahu says we are rewarding terrorism. And Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli prime minister, said in an interview that two states, okay, Palestinian state is fine, but a Palestinian state cannot have a border, cannot have a military, cannot have a capital. Then what Palestinian state you are talking about? And the Palestinians themselves are divided. You have Fatah party running parts of West Bank, and then you have Hamas in Gaza. So, no, I mean, you take any practical, yardstick, the two-state solution, I would say, died long time ago.
Well, thank you so much, Stanley, for your time and for your insights, always speaking with clarity. And, Clearly, I think, as you very rightly mentioned it in your article also today, that it's a conflict, it's a loop conflict, and there doesn't seem to be any deterrence in place to be able to break this loop. So really, it's a dangerous escalation stage that we have reached in, and sadly, the casualties keep rising, but even the Arab world has just been concentrating more on looking at their own interests at this point. So the United States doing, of course, what it does all the time, which is basically back its allies to the hilt, even if it's at the cost of the very morality sermonization that it does for other countries, including whether it's for Russians, for Iranians, or for the North
Exactly.
Koreans. So
Yeah.
for the viewers, thank you for tuning in, and you can always catch Stanley's fabulous episodes of Realpolitik on the Hindu's YouTube